We have David Spisak, we have Alan Haig, we have Cliff Banks and Steve Greenfield. Gentlemen, we're going to pull you up on the screen. All right. And we'll see if you can hear me.
What?
We can hear you.
You can hear me and I can hear you. We are making progress, gentlemen. You're getting a rousing round of applause from inside the room, and we're all smiles. So thanks for your patience and your flexibility on this. You know, the first time you do anything, we have some bumps. So I don't want to belabor this anymore. So everyone can see and hear. I'm just going to put us there. Can we get thumbs up again before I start asking questions? Thumbs up all over. I'm going to assume David can hear us. Double thumbs up. Okay. So gentlemen, thank you so much for giving us some time today. We were going to start off with this session initially, and I thought it was a really appropriate way to start because I like to start from the top and then start in the clouds and then get in the dirt. And the four of you definitely have the reputation of living in the clouds in a good way. Giving us a giving us a bird's eye view. Your wife tells you that, doesn't she? So why don't we start, David? I'm going to start with you because I talked about the Power Breakfast and why you assembled a group of people to start to think and how we could solve problems for dealers. So David, can you tell us your perspective right now on what's going on in automotive and what it is that dealers should really be paying attention to?
Well, we were just talking off air in the green room, as it were. Dealers are having a good time. You know, you've spoken before on ASOTU about the resiliency of dealers, and we've seen this is nothing new. We've seen dealers respond appropriately to handle challenges over and over and over again, and this was no different. And let's be honest, in the first 30 days this came out, people were freaked out. They didn't know what to expect. They were worried about the amount of inventory they're sitting on. They didn't know what they were going to do with their people. But guys, if you could think about this for a second, literally within 60 days, dealers came up with plans. They figured out a strategy, most of them. They went out and sought out the PPP money that was available. They did it the right way. Most of them were very judicious in the way they did it. They also re-examined their businesses at the core. And they looked at things like headcount. I mean, guys, we were employing about 925,000 people, you know, back in 2008 before the big recession. Within 10 years, that had swelled up to 1.13 million people, you know, employing 200,000 more people during the exact same 10-year period of time when we had unprecedented technology that came into the market with the promise, to Brian's point, of making us more effective and more efficient. So how do you reconcile that? Well, you can't. So what COVID did is it forced them to take a hard look, and they did. They made adjustments, initially with furloughing, but ultimately they had to make decisions, you recall, by July or by the end of June, in terms of final decisions of what they were going to do with their people. And they've maintained discipline for the most part in terms of ad spend. They're getting more accountability driven on ad spend. They've got the right staffing. They're becoming more open-minded and committed, to Brian's point, about meeting the customer where they want to be met. And that's critical. So those things are happening. As far as what you need to be paying attention to right now, guys, the used car market, it doesn't take long for things to shift. And it's almost like you could only look at your business in 90-day increments right now. So right now we're in a 90-day period, October, November, December, where a couple things to me are notable. Used cars have started to come back down to earth, out of the clouds, where they were indexing way above normal pricing, and now they're back to pretty close to normal. Availability has gotten better on used cars for the most part. Although I think going forward in the future, one thing every dealer has to do is have a fantastic acquisition strategy, because with CarMax, Carvana, Vroom, Shift, and more to come, it's getting more and more hyper competitive out there. Second thing that I think dealers need to really watch is they need to maintain discipline in terms of your expense structure. Don't get suckered into adding more people because, hey, we're doing so great. You're doing great because of the structure that you've built in the last 4 or 5 months. And as Alan will tell you, you know, when we hear from Alan, profitability is literally off the charts right now. And I don't know of any dealer that wants to go back to the way it was. Last thing, when it comes to looking forward, I think 2 words, technology stack. We've gotten to a point in time to where the sheer amount of solutions that are in the average dealership, just think about it. It wasn't that long ago, a couple of decades, you had 2 solutions in your store, a CRM and a DMS. Right. Now, how many do you have? The average dealer may have, on the low side, 8 to 12. On the high side, over 20 logins. Think about that. How do you log in to over 20 different things?
You don't.
And the irony is some of the things in that technology stack, Paul, talking about frictionless, are actually adding friction. They're the very things keeping you from achieving frictionless that Brian Benstock's been speaking about for years. So I think that in 2021, you got to take a hard look at your technology stack. And I'll leave you with this analogy. If you went to the doctor today and you had an illness and the doctor said, I'm going to give you this prescription to help you feel better. You take it home, and so long as that's the only prescription in your medicine cabinet, chances are if you take it, it's going to work. Worst case, you go back and they give you something different. But what if you go home and you have 11 or 12 other prescriptions in that medicine cabinet? How is that 13th prescription going to interact with the other 12? Is it now in the same position to help you get better, or could it, ironically, potentially make you worse or affect your health in an adverse way? That's the technology stack. So once you start looking at it that way, you start to really understand that everything you bring in a store has got to interact with every other thing in your store, including your sales team, your delivery team, and everybody else who's part of the client experience. So I really think technology stack is going to become
a lot of sense.
Because frankly, the way Brian always spoke about it is pizza boxes stacked on top of the DMS. And the challenge is every one of them is spewing data. None of them talk this way. None of them are integrated, or very few of them are. But 2 things you're going to start to need to look for and demand going forward is integration and intelligence. If the things you're bringing in your store do not have integration points that help bring a true efficiency, and they don't have data intelligence abilities to help your team become more efficient and more consistent, then I think that it could be problematic.
Well, it's very obvious. It's very obvious that there's so many things right now, and it's so complex. I like your analogy of the prescriptions, because without a doubt, not just in the tech stack, but that analogy holds up even throughout all the different movers and shakers that are happening within the market. We have private equity coming in. We have a lot of M&A activity. We have a lot of technology being introduced. We have new customer experience coming in. So if with that analogy, every time you adjust one, everything else is going to need to accommodate as well. So on that note, Cliff, I'd like to ask you, you're somebody who understands a lot of prescriptions, and you probably see more of the prescriptions being written than maybe anyone else, and that's why you kind of summarize those and try to keep us up to date in the Banks report. Why don't you give us same question, the answer, what do you see as the most important thing for dealers to consider? And that could be a variety of things, but I'm really curious in how you would distill that down to the most pertinent information, which is your skill.
Well, yeah, I think obviously dealers are living high right now. Big part is, as David pointed out, I think inventory is at a level now that helps drive profitability, and we're seeing that. Obviously, dealers have become much more efficient this year also in getting rid of or eliminating a lot of the unnecessary costs in their businesses. How long this is going to continue remains to be seen. I think right now it's great. However, as we start moving forward, I would urge dealers to look at their capital and make sure you're well capitalized. You have sources of money out there that are going to help you manage your businesses and grow your businesses moving forward. Yeah, I kind of look at the industry right now as being in a holding pattern, so to speak, because we have several things coming down the pipe, but they're not going to be here in scale in the next, probably for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Connected vehicles, that's going to change a big part of this industry in terms of the relationship with manufacturers, in terms of technology and how you interact with customers. It's going to bring new technology advancements to the industry, such as cloud-based platforms, which is going to hopefully drive a lot of integration that David was just talking about that we need, and eliminating some of that friction. But that's still, in the next 3, 4, 5, even 10 years down the road.
Right.
But that stuff is coming, and it's important to be aware and know and understand that there's going to be some capital requirements of dealers. So look, I don't think the tipping point in the industry is happening today or tomorrow. But I do think within the next 5 years, we're going to start having a much better idea of what the industry is going to look like, into the next decade.
That makes, it's funny, these conversations that you just brought up, connected vehicles, these are things that we were talking about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right?
5 years ago, some of us, yeah.
Right, and I'm gonna say, like, being at NADA, we heard a lot of talk about that, and it was like the impending doom, and here we are a number of years later, and it hasn't doomed yet. And granted, COVID has kind of probably stretched everything out a lot further. How close do you really think we are to that affecting the industry? Because just speaking on behalf of a lot of people that have heard that, you can start to adopt it as rhetoric when it doesn't happen.
Sure. Yeah, no, right. And there's certainly some hype, there's been some hype surrounding that, but it does take time for these vehicles to be designed properly at the OEM level. I mean, GM has reoriented its entire vehicle architecture to accommodate the connected vehicle platform, and we're going to start seeing those rolling out. We're already seeing applications where the manufacturer's getting the information from the vehicle and pushing that to the dealer already in terms of service. That we're on the very beginning of that becoming the norm. But again, Paul, I agree. I mean, these things do take a little bit of time. Manufacturers have to get their data in order.
Come on, we know you have a crystal ball. We know you have a crystal ball there somewhere. Can't just tell us when it's going to happen?
Well, 5 years ago, I wrote 4 years ago it was going to start happening now. We were going to be at the beginning. I think 2023, 2025 range, we're going to start really seeing some of the impact.
Some significant impact.
Of the connected vehicle.
No, that's
Plus,
helpful.
We're already working on new platforms, cloud-based platforms. We see the case for Telus. There's OXO, there's all of these other players from outside the industry that are working with OEMs right now, building these platforms that are going to demand APIs. So instead of being a direct integration type industry, at some point we're going to have to become API driven, and that's something for all the vendors. And certainly the changes that we're going to be seeing happening at Reynolds over the near future. CDK is trying to drive for Telus. We're going to start seeing more of this.
Great.
If I could jump in.
What I'd love to do is to just get to Steve and then get to Alan, and we'll go around because Alan, I feel like you are the most in touch with what is going on at the dealer level because you're in the middle of all these acquisitions. So I want to get you to follow up and speak after Steve, but that's what I want because you're all up in the feelings, the thoughts, the emotions of dealers as they're considering, should I stay in the game or should I start to get out of the game? So Steve, I want to move to you real quick. Basically the same way we framed up everything else. Thanks for your patience. What are you seeing from an overarching perspective? You also produce a really well-written and thorough publication every month. And so what are your perspectives on the broad level of what dealers should be paying attention to? And I know it's a big question because there's a lot of things going on, but if you can just narrow that down a little bit for the direction that dealers should be at least having their head turned, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, great. Well, Paul, I'll start by saying just thank you, right? Thank you for doing this. I mean, everything you're doing on behalf of dealers right now, being a voice that's needed, an advocate and a champion. I think, it isn't easy being a dealer. What it has been in Q3, maybe from a profitability standpoint, but in general, there's a lot of pressures. And I think that kudos to you for doing this. So I'll start with that. And thank you for having all of us on this session. I think what I'll say is in accordance with what David and Cliff just said. I think if I'm a dealer sitting back, kind of processing things, I think one thing is don't get too overly optimistic based on, a couple of months worth of profitability, and don't, draw that out to the future and extrapolate. I think it's great for Alan's business that, there's these high multiples being paid and a lot of buy-sell activity. And we'll hear from him next. But I would say that one is, what David said earlier is very, very important. Work closely on your operations and with your vendors to keep costs suppressed, because we don't know what the next 6 or 9 months are going to look like. And take the opportunity, given that you've just figured out how to keep costs suppressed, to ensure that going into the future, you reset your cost structure and therefore have higher margins going forward. Great for you, great for your people, and great for your business. Two is, we know a couple of things about the markets, right? Despite COVID and an economic downturn, and a presidential race that's been contentious, we have stock markets that are at all-time highs. We have buy-sell activity that's at all-time highs. And there's over $1 trillion worth of capital sitting out there in private equity and venture capital that hasn't yet been deployed. It's now starting to get confidence because there's light at the end of the tunnel. We're hearing about vaccines that are going to be very effective. Although that may take some time to get dispersed, out to all of us. But I think that right now what we're going to see is like a lot of money chasing ideas now that there's more stability and light at the end of the tunnel. I think that will manifest in a lot of acquisitions, a lot of tuck-ins. You're going to see big public players buying others. You may see big public players getting absorbed. We've seen this year a lot of electric EV manufacturers going public. It's now quite easy to go public through these special purpose acquisition corporations. So if I'm a dealer and I'm sitting here, great. Business is good. Like David said, there are some headwinds. I think longer term, I think what Cliff just said should not be ignored, right? I think we're going to have stability with the dealer model for the next, say, 5 years. I think for me, if I'm a dealer and I'm sitting here, there's less certainty 5 years out how these things like connected cars, like electric OEMs that are coming in that aren't going to have to invest in a dealer network that I'm going to have to be selling against. Tesla pushing back on these state laws around franchises. Yeah. I think that all of these things, and then not the least of which is we're seeing the consumer sort of with an inflection point, getting more comfortable with doing more of their shopping online.
Yes.
And then you're seeing these big public companies investing hundreds of millions of dollars in technology to ensure that they can either bring a car to someone's driveway or at least provide curbside delivery so the consumer effectively is never ever going to go into the dealership. So how do dealers then, who have based their entire foundation on the relationship with the consumer and the lifetime value of that consumer, if things get more transactional, and consumer says, I'm going to go to Carvana or I'm going to come to you, but I never even want to step inside the dealership. Dealers have to say, existentially, how am I going to be able to compete and offer up solutions that allow me to provide better consumer experiences, knowing that consumers are going to have many more choices. Yep. and may not want to come into the dealership any longer. So I think we've heard from Alex. Alex is Alex Vetter, a huge proponent of offering solutions to dealers to make sure that they continue to be relevant and can put their best foot forward to make sure that they their digital storefront and the interface with consumers online help dealers to succeed and break through. But I think that some combination of making sure that you focus on cost suppression going forward and work closely with your vendors and your operations. But also, I mean, the horse is out of the barn around the consumer experience, and we've seen elements of the future. And look no farther than Carvana. Look at other verticals, and just like how you spend your time and what you buy. I have at least 3 to 5 boxes a day that show up on my doorstep from Amazon. That's right. Because they make it so easy. Yep. The good thing about Amazon is I don't price compare. I go to the first page of Amazon and I look back
that's
that
where
page.
it is, right. If it's not there, you don't buy it.
So, value in the dealer world, value trumps price, right? At all times. So you have to figure, like, what is your unique value proposition? I think we are going into a world where the consumer is going to have much more control and transparency. But if we've learned anything from Amazon, is like consumers aren't necessarily price sensitive on Amazon, which could be a great world for dealers because they may have consumers that want the convenience but are willing to pay more, or at least don't try to grind you down on price.
Right. In that case, I think, Alan, bringing this all full circle, it is without a doubt we are in one of the most complex times in automotive, and I hear this chatter, and you hear more of it, this growing uneasiness within dealers who aren't sure, should I stay in, or is now a great time to get out? And you know, you probably function a lot like a therapist, because when people are willing to reach out to you and say, hey, I'm considering selling, right? It's a very emotional decision in many cases. It's a very big decision. So when people come and ask you that question, inevitably, what should I sell? Should I hold? What is your advice to dealers right now?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, we're working on our Q3 Haig report right now. We've compilated a lot of data, and there's really never been a better time to be a dealer. We have record high gross profits on new and used. We have record high gross profits in F&I product sales. We have pretty low costs. I think David mentioned that earlier. They've got lower inventory costs, lower advertising costs. They've taken personnel comp out of their businesses. And the result is we have record high profits at dealerships today. Through the first 9 months of the year, we're at $1.6 million, I think, which is higher than what we saw back in 2015. We had another spike, you know, in sales and profitability. So, you know, we don't counsel people, you're making record profits, you should sell right now. I mean, I think it's a personal decision that has to do with that dealer's, you know, do they have a unique selling proposition? Do they have a group of scale? I mean, certainly we think that groups that have good franchises and good markets can compete against the largest dealers. But if you have a large group and you don't have a succession plan, you know that the tax rates are going to be low for the next 2 years, assuming that the Republicans keep the Senate. So you've got kind of a 2-year window to enjoy record high profits, which also is leading to record high dealership valuations. I mean, the blue sky values that we've seen right now are higher than we've ever seen on an average dealership. The public company stock prices are up 23%. So it's not just happening on the private side, it's happening on the public side. So if you believe you've got a strategy that, you know, you've got management and you've got good brands in your good market, I think that you can compete against larger groups. But if you're not sure you have the right people, if you don't think that you want to invest and really lean forward and incorporate what it's going to take to be a successful retailer, when you're competing with Carvana, when you're competing with Vroom, when you're competing with, I mean, Asbury announced a new app, I guess it's going to be, which is called Glovebox, which is matching up with Lithia's Driveway. AutoNation's got, you know, online digital retailing tool. So if you can match those with a product that comes from cars.com or some other vendor, then maybe you can compete. But otherwise, it's feeling to us as though finally scale and brand and technology is at the point where leading dealers that have those assets can begin to take share profitably from those dealers who do not. And then it can accelerate, right? Once you start to lose sales, you then start to lose people. And Mike Jackson said it before, there's a battle for talent and capital auto retail. And if you're at the group that doesn't have the talent, doesn't have the technology, doesn't have a plan, then your best people are going to migrate right across the street to a dealership group that does have those assets. And that's something that we fear for our clients. And so if we see a client or potential client that doesn't seem to have those assets, then we tell them, here's what your stores are worth today. And they can decide if it's worth it to them to continue to operate their stores or take their chips off the table and diversify and invest in other businesses where they feel like they have a longer term opportunity to succeed.
So what if I could sum that up real quick? Just basically saying, if you have the desire, motivation, and fortitude to keep going and keep changing, lean in. But if you can't fully commit to leaning in, it's time to lean out.
I think that's a fair synopsis, and I'll be curious if my colleagues on the panel here see it the same way.
Well, here's what I have to do. Unfortunately, believe it or not, we chewed through our time that quickly. I can't go into more discussion, but what I really want to do is continue this conversation, and we can do this afterward and keep it going. But just very quickly, if you could give me in 5 to 10 seconds, what's the best way for people to stay connected with you? Because there is a fire hose of information that's relevant that you put out all the time, and I want to make sure people can get it from you. Let's start with you, Alan, since you went last. What is the best way for people to connect with you?
Well, our website posts our quarterly Haig reports that track trends in the industry and their impact on dealership values.
And what is that website?
My email is Alan.
Go ahead. I was going to say, what's the website?
www.haig. Yeah, it's haigpartners.com.
Haig Partners.
Or I'm Alan. That's right. Or I'm Alan at haigpartners.com is my email.
Very good. We're going in reverse order. Steve Greenfield, what is the best way for people to sign up and get all the great information that you're producing?
So 2 things. Sign up for my free monthly newsletter at automotive.ventures, and tune in on Fridays to CBT News to see me provide a recap of the weekly M&A activity in automotive technology, CBT News.
Very great. Mr. Banks, how should people stay connected with you?
I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, and then also the banksreport.com.
Banksreport.com. Great. Mr. Spisak, final word.
You could find me on Tinder. I'm kidding.
He would say that. Swipe right. Yeah.
No, you can find me on LinkedIn, David Spisak on LinkedIn, David at Disruptive Growth Solutions, and please go to Disruptive Growth Solutions. That site launches today. We will start to accept subscribers today for our free content, which, as you know, is the Power Breakfast that I'm fortunate enough to be surrounded with the members, including yourself, Paul, Alan, Haig, Steve, Cliff Banks, and the best and brightest minds in the business, both dealers as well as subject matter experts. So go to disruptivegrowthsolutions.com, hit subscribe. It's a free subscription forever, and you could access not only Power Breakfast content, but we have a retail ecosystem that will connect you with most of the technology and products that we're talking about, as well as giving you a path for making better decisions when buying those types of solutions.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to have David host my next telethon, by the way. It's going to be great. Gentlemen, thank you so much for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. We're going to do this again and do it more, but thanks for giving us your time and helping dealers move forward. Appreciate you. I'll talk to you soon.